Hello, I'm going to show off a little demo of driving around the Kerbal Space Center with this little mustached bug rover. I've got a couple of mods installed. These ones I think are from SETI, or maybe it was the ScanSat probe pack or something like that. Anyways, there's some extra science parts, and then some cameras that are kind of fun. I've got my Kerbal operating system mod, which is the main point of this demo. I'm going to be driving around without touching the keyboard or mouse and collecting data from each of the 10 waypoints that I added. So first you select the boot file. I'm on mission 7. And I increased my disk space. I don't think I actually need quite that much. I think 10 was actually plenty. And then I've got this SETI probe pack stack, or probe stack 1, which includes a thermometer, so I don't need an extra thermometer. And yeah, let's launch this thing and see how it goes. I've seen a couple bugs every time I run through, so who knows if we see one here. But basically, I start off and launch my panels, collect science from each of the items, and then I collect the data in the data storage unit. We'll switch to this camera for a little bit. And then as I'm driving to the next waypoint, which is a little bit bumpy, I print out the how many waypoints I read from a JSON file, which current waypoint we're looking at, where it is latitude, longitude, my current heading, or the heading to that thing, which my steering is locked to that, and I'm still trying to figure out how to make it so that the wheels are not quite as sensitive. Because they're so sensitive, it makes it so that it moves back and forth quite a bit, even though the actual heading difference is only 1/100th of a degree heading difference. Switching back and forth between that heading difference so frequently moves me quite a bit. Anyway, so I'm currently heading at about 8 meters per second is my desired speed. When I get to the waypoint within 4 meters of it, I will stop and do more science. Again, I'm not touching my keyboard other than to just change the camera around and move some of these things out of the way. So my last stop, I got 4 science. I should get another 4 science from this, and it will collect the science into the storage unit. There it goes. And as you can see, I drew little vectors for each of my waypoint. So I'm going to hop around, and each time that you draw the vector, in my testing of this, it seems like when it draws it relative to the center of mass of the ship, and if you start driving, it follows that offset. So on each of my updates, which I think I do every 0.1 seconds or something like that, it will redraw. It will clear all the arrows and then redraw them. Now this is the astronaut complex, and I'm going to the flagpole. There are some things that you can get from the flagpole when you EVA, but I forgot whether or not you could get extra science. It turns out you can't, and as a result, when you already have data in your science parts and you try to collect, it won't actually clear the contents. See how it says I already have those things? So in my loop that basically says to do the science, the first thing I do is I try to collect, then I clear out the actual contents of the science parts, and then I redo the science things, and then I collect. So that at the end, I've tried collecting at least twice, but if there's nothing there, it's just basically a no-op. So each of these waypoints, like I said, is read from a JSON file. I basically drove around and had an action button that whenever I pressed it, logged the latitude and longitude of my ship, and then when I had each of those, I put it into the JSON format of a geo position, which isn't just the latitude longitude, it also includes like the fact that it's on the Kerbin, and so whenever I read it, I have to pull out the latitude longitude and recreate a new lat long, and let's speed this up, because then we can go look at some of this code. Speeding it up, you can see that it kind of wiggles quite a bit more, so you can't really do it at full speed. I'm still trying to figure out how to get rid of this little wiggle. You can see the wheels kind of adjusting at a very high frequency, and they're trying to correct quite a bit, and then that gets us off. It would be nice if the actual delta from the desired heading didn't change quite as much. I suppose I could probably lock to prograde or something, and then or just turn the throttle on and not worry about the heading. I don't know exactly. I'm still trying to figure that out. If you have suggestions, let me know. But the actual lock wheel steering to heading doesn't give me a lot of control that I know of. Like, there's not like PID loop variables that I know about. If this was an airplane, I know that you can adjust the basically how much each aileron, I don't know if they're ailerons or whatever the control structures are called on wings. I don't know exactly, other than turning the motor speed up and the brake thing. Like, I don't know if there is something that you can do to adjust so that it's finer detailed, because I can't really go very fast because of this. If I go too fast, then I wobble a lot. If I was testing for a while at 6 meters per second and it ran pretty dang smooth. 8 gets me there slightly faster but has a lot more wobble. 10, I just start to really wobble like crazy, and I've crashed at least once. And then when I'm done, I end up over at the launch pad, and if I wanted to, I probably would put a couple more waypoints and get out in the water so that I could use this bathymetry, submersible oceanography and bathymetry part, which basically is like collect some water. So some of the hard things in here was figuring out how to do the actual syntax. Some of the documentation pages, I think, had some bugs. I don't know really how to suggest doing updates there, but I'm sure that you do some sort of change on git and then request a push or something like that. So I'll figure out how to get those. In the meantime, I am putting the code and craft file for this on my GitHub. On my name there is also Topher Hansen, and the project is called KOS Funtimes. So you can see the code that I used, and you can see up here that I'm using KOS version 1.01. I think this was a pre-release. I haven't updated for about 2 weeks, I think, since I downloaded it. This was right after 1.2 of KSP came out. And here's my final waypoint. and when it finishes the last waypoint, it will wait 10 seconds and then end the program. And then I will be able to manually drive around if I want. So I'm starting to press keyboard buttons just to prove that I can. Alright, let's just recover this vessel and get some science, and I'll start looking at the code with you. Oh, it looks like climate change happened. So we've got our 40 experiments recovered and 92 science. Alright, let's look at this code. Okay. So I have a boot script, which basically I've used Cheers Kevin's little notify function. Cheers Kevin Games is a YouTube channel where I learned a lot about how to do Kerbal operating system. I highly recommend that channel. So I wait for the physics to kind of settle down, and then I copy over from my archive the Rover drive, the JSON, and a library that I wrote for doing science. And then I run the do science library so that the functions are loaded, and then I run my Rover script. The Rover script basically looks like this. Let me increase the font size. That's probably helpful. Alright, there we go. I start off setting the desired speed and heading just so it's set to something. At one point I was trying to write down the latitude longitude of the current ship location. This is how I would do it. And I would write the waypoints to a file like this. I'm currently not doing that, so I have this commented out. That's what these little symbols are. So right now I'm reading the JSON, which in the boot script we copied from the archive, or 0 to 1. You can technically read and write from archive, but some people think of that as cheating, since it doesn't take away from your disk size. So I copied it to 1 just to feel like I'm role-playing a little bit better. And then there's a PID loop for the throttle. I don't really remember exactly what these are. I think this is the well, I try to explain it, but I'll get it wrong. Look at the wiki on the KOS wiki. It explains it. This is like between -1 and 1 for the desired throttle. Excuse me. I turn on my panels. I turn the brakes off, and I also set up my vector draw list. And then I have this loop that basically loops forever until we're done with all the waypoints, and then I print done. So this is the loop that runs every single tick, physics tick in the game. So we're going to draw all the vectors and clear them right before we draw them. And so I have just a little integer to keep track of which one I'm looking at, and I draw each of the vectors. This is was from an example on the KOS wiki as well, but I just modified it. Again, if you don't clear the vectors, you'll end up with a zillion vectors, and they kind of they just follow along relative to the ship if you don't clear them. This clear screen and all this stuff I could probably push into a function so it's a little cleaner, but this is where I draw on the KOS terminal all of the data that I'm trying to keep track of to make sure that my rover is doing what it's supposed to. I have, it looks like I changed it to a 0.02 weight between each loop. If I get to the waypoint, or 4 meters away or less, then I turn the brakes on, I print out a statement, and I call my library get science data, and then I turn the brakes off, and I have incremented my waypoint index, which means that the next time it tries to set the heading and the desired speed and all these different things, it's going to go to the next waypoint. I do science. Let's actually make sure that this is the right font. Yeah, 18. Okay. Like I said, I delete the stray data whenever I get science. I came up with a helper function for actions and parts, and a list part module. So if you give it a part name as it's printed in when you right click on a part, then it will list out at the time it lists it what the current actions, events, and fields are. Now if the part is in a different state, such as if the magnetometer boom is extended or retracted, or if the part has data in it or doesn't have data in it, the contents of this file that is listed out can be different. Which means there's going to be bugs as you do stuff. So you'll see, and sometimes I have an action for collecting the container, but sometimes I have an event, container collect all. Now sometimes I wasn't collecting content, and it took a little while to figure that out. So I would reproduce the issue and list the part modules at the time that it didn't collect and see what was missing. This is the first time I've really talked this long in a video, so I should probably prepare better with some water. Anyway, since the magnetometer boom animates, I wait a few seconds before and after to make sure that I can collect the data from that. Use part basically when I'm deleting the stray data. I call both the event and the action with this name. It just saves me a little bit of trouble figuring out whether it was an action or event. The magnetometer and bathymetry, definitely the magnetometer, it didn't have a thing called delete data. It had the discard magnetometer data. I think that the bathymetry one is probably discard bathymetry data, but it might be delete data. So if I ever actually go out to the water, one of these should work. Here is the function that lists all the parts to a file. This was from the KOS wiki, but I think there was a bug or two in how they wrote it, because if the you have to, I think that, well, anyway, I wanted to show off this. Okay, so for using a part, an action or an event, the only difference really is I'm checking whether it has an action or an event, and we're calling do event or do action. Otherwise these functions are identical. So you have a part, a module, and an event or action, and this is I originally set this up to do to extend an antenna, so this is just a naming error. But basically, find the part with this name. We call it an antenna for some silly reason. There could be multiple of them, so for each of them, find that part and get the module in it that has the name that you declared. And if it has that event or action, then call that thing. If it doesn't, then it'll throw an exception, and it just doesn't work. So it's nicer to just do that. Anyway, here is what the JSON looks like for the waypoints. Some entry. I have each of the entries is an integer followed by a geoposition. So it's latitude, longitude, and then a body, and then the type. So that when you read the JSON, it works just fine. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this, and hopefully next time I will remember to bring some water. Bye.